Due to his infidelity and sexual appetite, Henry VIII had several children. He had a legitimate son with his wife Catherine of Aragon, whose tragic death changed the course of history, an acknowledged illegitimate son, whom he considered making king, and as many as 6 other children with his mistresses. Even the most casual student of English history will be familiar with the names of Henry VIII's 3 surviving legitimate children, Queen Mary I, Queen Elizabeth I, and King Edward VI. These 3 illustrious monarchs and their sibling rivalries are among the most famous in history. They included a playwright, Queen Elizabeth, a pirate con artist, and William Shakespeare's first closest friend. These are their narratives. It might be shocking to learn that Henry VIII had 6 other children from his mistresses during the course of his reign. In this episode, we will discuss Henry's other children. Henry, Duke of Cornwall. At 18, Henry VIII ascended to the throne of England. He wed the attractive and intellectual 24-year-old Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his brother. Nearly immediately after becoming pregnant, the joyful couple had a stillborn daughter, Catherine. On New Year's Day in 1511, a year later, the Queen gave birth to a healthy child. With the birth of their son, the royal couple was ecstatic. Henry then ordered free wine and bonfires to be lighted around London, solidifying the Tudor dynasty. Filled the fountains, the midwife was awarded a substantial sum of money. With delight, the Queen observed her son being bathed, wrapped, and put in his massive cradle. Queen Catherine's son was christened when he was 5 days old, but she was unable to attend the opulent ceremony because custom dictated that she must stay in bed for 30 days after the birth. The infant was given the name Henry in honor of both his father and the several monarchs who came before him to rule England. In addition, he received the title of Duke of Cornwall, a land-rich peerage that currently belongs to Prince Charles and was held by the heir apparent since Edward the Black Prince in 1337. After Catherine was purified by the churching rite, she and Henry returned to Westminster Palace and left their young son behind at Richmond Palace, as was customary for royal offspring. Baby Henry was lavished with costly gifts from lords and monarchs near and far. The King and Queen of Westminster threw lavish celebrations rivaling their own joint coronation, including feasts, masques, and a jousting tournament with lavish prizes. However, the mood quickly changed from joy to despair when Henry and Catherine learned that their baby son had died at the age of just 52 days. Although baby Henry would have received frequent visits from his parents, he was raised by his own household of nurses and staff. Infant mortality was sadly prevalent at the period, and stories imply that he died of a bronchial infection. His mother, Catherine, was distraught. Courtiers wearing black bands escorted the prince's little casket to Westminster Abbey on a barge covered in black fabric. His parents were not permitted to attend the official funeral, which was held in honor of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, who were heartbroken by their son's passing and their aspirations for the future. 55 people paid to pray for the soul of the would-be king. However, at the ages of 20 and 26, they thought they still had a long way to go before they had more robust kids. That isn't what happened as far as we know. 3 of the 4 additional babies that Catherine gave birth to passed away soon after. Princess Mary, her lone surviving child, was born 5 years after her older brother, Henry VIII's father, who had usurped the kingdom on the basis of a somewhat shaky claim. In the 1100s, Matilda, the only other woman to seek to rule England, was overthrown by her cousin Stephen, resulting in a 20-year period of warfare throughout the realm. Henry VIII was certain that appointing a son to the throne was the only way to preserve his dynasty and prevent violence. When Henry VIII's father died in 1547, he would have been a 36-year-old man and probably a parent of his own. However, Instead of becoming a legend or meme, Henry VIII's attempt to conceive a male heir was the subject of memes and tales. In order to get a divorce from his once-loved wife Catherine, he broke with the Catholic Church. He launched the Protestant Reformation in England, which cost the lives of thousands of people over the following centuries, and he personally went through 6 different wives, beheading 2 of them all in the quest to secure his dynasty with sons. All of this might never have happened if poor baby Henry, Duke of Cornwall, had lived. Henry Fitzroy. As may be expected of a French monarch, Henry VIII had multiple liaisons with women during the course of his life. Although the title King's Mistress, or Materci en titre, was an official title at court, Henry VIII had only one surviving legitimate child, a 3-year-old princess named Mary, after his marriage to Catherine of Aragon lasted 10 years. The king pursued other ladies in an attempt to satisfy his inflated ego and demonstrate to the public that he was a legitimate father. A teenage girl named Elizabeth Bessie Blount, who was in waiting to the Queen, fell pregnant for Henry. While Catherine was confined, unfortunately, she gave birth to another stillborn child. After Bessie was taken to the country and she gave birth to a healthy boy, King Henry was overjoyed to see evidence of his virility and claimed the child as his own. He named the boy Henry after his father and Fitzroy, an Anglo-Norman name meaning son of the king, and historically used for illegitimate royal children. King Henry even proudly displayed his newborn son at court, while Queen Catherine was away. Baby Henry was raised in a manner similar to that of a real royal child, moving from house to house with the royal nursery and living side by his older sister Mary. His mother had minimal influence over his upbringing. By Henry Fitzroy's 60th birthday, the king planned for Bessie to marry Gilbert Baron Tailboys of Chelmy. Queen Catherine was approaching her 40th birthday, and the royal father was still without a legal son. The Duke of Richmond, the Duke of Somerset, and the Earl of Nottingham were bestowed upon his only son by the king, who also threw caution to the wind and threw caution to his wife's feelings. Double dukedoms were an exceptionally high honor, carrying with them immense wealth and land mainly inherited from the king's grandmother, Margaret Beaufort. The title Duke of Somerset held particular significance because its first holder, John Beaufort, was born into an illegitimate family but later recognized as a royal. It appeared that the king was offering Henry Fitzroy, then 6 years old, the opportunity to become his own heir. At the age of 10, Fitzroy was appointed Lord President of the Council of the North, effectively making him the governor of Northern England. Fitzroy was then transferred to a new household in Yorkshire. His father wanted to crown him King of Ireland, but the council urged against it, fearing that if Henry Fitzroy did not end up becoming King of England as well, then the 2 countries would once again become rivals. Councillors, who opposed the breakup, suggested that Henry Fitzroy marry his half-sister, Princess Mary, so that he could claim the title of King of England, and the Tudor dynasty would have been secured through their offspring. Henry was frustrated at not having a legitimate male heir, and started inquiries into having his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. The European royals were notorious for marrying their own relatives, but a marriage between siblings was considered excessive. The Pope was even prepared to approve a special dispensation for this incestuous union. Henry Fitzroy was instead married to Lady Mary Howard, the only daughter of Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, one of the king's closest advisors, and Anne Boleyn's cousin. Henry VIII was not as keen on this idea as he was on leaving Catherine and marrying his new paramour, Anne Boleyn, and he hoped fathering more sons by her. Fitzroy's new father-in-law had high hopes for his daughter to become queen one day. He married Anne Boleyn, but she only had one daughter, Elizabeth. Henry decapitated Anne and forced a bill through Parliament that disinherited Elizabeth and gave him the power to choose his own legitimate successor. The king may have intended for this bill to let him name his only son as his heir, but tragically, Henry Fitzroy died of tuberculosis at the age of 17. King Henry VIII's legitimate son, Edward, was born a year later. Royal children grew up in palaces and never had to worry about anything, but his illegitimate children were essentially left on their own and had to learn how to be crafty and resourceful in order to survive in Tudor England. Thomas Stukley. Henry Fitzroy slept the night at Atherton Castle during the summer he was born, while Henry VIII was in progress. Jane Pollard, the lady of the manor, gave birth to a boy 9 months later. Although Sir Hugh Stukley, the spouse of Thomas Jane, claimed paternity, there was a widespread rumour that the boy's real father was someone else. The Duke of Suffolk, the Bishop of Exeter, and King Henry's brother-in-law all served as mentors to young Thomas. Thomas enlisted in the military and was there. His sole surviving legitimate son, King Edward VI, was Edward Seymour, the regent to Henry's successor, whom he joined during the siege of Boulogne, France. An arrest warrant for Thomas was issued after Seymour was decapitated, but he was able to flee to France and work as a mercenary there. He was ordered back to England by King Henry II to serve at the court of his half-brother, Edward VI. He explained to the 15-year-old king that, although he had been sent by the French as part of an invasion plan, he had made the decision to warn his brother and stick by him. John Dudley, Edward's new regent, did not share Edward's belief in Thomas. A year later, Edward passed away, leaving his brother with a fortune that Thomas rapidly devoured. After that, he went back to being a soldier of fortune and started robbing people on the side. Because of his royal ties, he spent the next few years going back and forth from prison. Anne Curtis, a wealthy and well-born woman, was his wife. However, he spent all of her money and even sold off some of her family's assets. Thomas left his wife behind because he had another warrant out and left for Italy. He was accused of piracy when he was last seen in England, but Queen Elizabeth I, whom he addressed as our dearest sister, freed him. Thomas then persuaded her to give him 5 ships and 100 men so he could establish a colony in Florida. After staging a naval pageant for the Queen on the Thames, he quickly sent his fleet to Ireland, where he started privateering against Portuguese, French, and Spanish ships. The Queen dispatched her navy to apprehend her rebellious brother following repeated protests from the aggrieved powers, but he was again found not guilty. Then, Thomas asked his sister to make him the Marshal of Ireland, but she refused and vowed never to fall for his trick again. In response, Thomas said he didn't fart for his sister and that he offered his services to King Philip II of Spain, who was her nemesis. Raising money to conquer Ireland in Spain's name, he set ship for Madrid. Additionally, he sailed to Rome, where Pope Gregory XIV approved of his scheme as part of a broader scheme to depose Elizabeth the Protestant Queen and replace her with Mary Queen of Scots, her Catholic cousin. Thomas headed out on his promised invasion of Ireland, armed with papal and Spanish wealth. However, he paused in Portugal en route, where King Sebastian offered him a better deal to join his invasion of Morocco. At the age of 58, Thomas lost his life in the fight of Alcazar Quibir. He was supposedly sliced in half by a cannonball that his sister Queen Elizabeth had sent to the Moroccans. The second child of Bessie Blount, Elizabeth Tailboys, was claimed by her husband, Gilbert Baron Tailboys, but historians close to Betsy speculate that King Henry may have fathered her as well, similar to what happened to her older brother Henry Fitzroy, even though the king might not have known Elizabeth. Elizabeth's marriage to wealthy landowner Thomas Wiebush was planned by Henry VIII, although the two were not happy together. Elizabeth became the independent Baroness Tailboys of Kyme after outliving all 3 of her brothers. King Henry decided that Elizabeth may maintain the barony for herself, despite her estranged husband's attempts to take the title from her. A few years later, Thomas passed away, leaving his mother and sisters to inherit his estate while leaving his wife Elizabeth with very little. The elder brother of Robert Dudley, the great favourite of Elizabeth's potential half-sister Queen Elizabeth, first Elizabeth Tailboys, passed away at the age of 43. Elizabeth then married Sir Ambrose Dudley, Earl of Warwick. Katherine Carey. Before Henry VIII became enamoured with Anne Boleyn, he harboured feelings for Mary, Anne's older sister, a few years earlier. The monarch was drawn to the field of gold cloth by Mary's beauty. He made approaches on Catherine of Aragon while she was a lady awaiting her marriage. As a wedding present, King Henry gave Mary and courtier William Carey an incredibly enormous sum of money, which might have been used to buy the husband's help in luring the wife away. Mary gave birth to 2 children, Henry and Catherine, whose names were assumed to be those of the monarch, but were actually Mary's husbands. Following her coronation, Anne Boleyn funded her niece and nephew's schooling. It's possible that young Catherine sought comfort from her aunt by staying with her in the Tower of London. Prior to her execution at the age of 16, Catherine worked as a maid of honour for Anne of Cleves, King Henry's 4th wife. After receiving the boot, she went on to serve her cousin, Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, until she was executed. Sir Francis Knollys was married to Catherine. Since the Knolleys were ardent Protestants, they fled to Germany when Mary I assumed the crown. Elizabeth succeeded Mary as queen 5 years after Mary's death. She invited her to court in a letter to her cousin, who may be her half-sister. The Queen's closest female relative was Catherine, with whom she developed a close relationship. The highest status for a woman at court was given to Catherine when she was appointed Chief Lady of the Bedchamber. She carried 14 children, all but one of whom survived childhood, and managed her cousin's complex toilet and dressing routine. Her spouse was mentioned as well. At the age of 45, Katherine Carey, the Queen's household treasurer, passed away. She was buried in Westminster Abbey next to her cousin, a close friend and potential half-sister, Henry Carey. Henry VIII may also have fathered Catherine's younger brother. After Anne Boleyn became queen, she supported her nephew and covered the cost of his excellent education. Henry was 10 years old when Anne was beheaded, but at 19, she continued to support and ensure the education of her nephew by way of many Protestant scholars. After Henry wed Anne Morgan, the 2 of them had 16 children. He was a member of Parliament twice. He held a number of prestigious positions under the reign of his cousin, Elizabeth I, who was also perhaps his half-sister. He was made Baron of Hunsdon, a Knight of the Guardian Master of the Queen's Hawks, and the Queen's personal bodyguard for 4 years. Northern England's Catholic nobility revolted against Queen Henry in 1569. Tasked with leading the Queen's army as Lieutenant General, he rode north. After he routed an army twice the size of his own, his cousin lavishly bestowed upon him even more titles and distinctions, including the title of Lord Chamberlain. Shakespeare's theatre group, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, had him as a sponsor. Additionally, he had an affair with Amelia Lenaire, a 45-year-old woman who was the first professional poet in England and may have been secretly Jewish. He fathered her 1 child. Henry Carey passed away at 70 years old. Richard Edwards. Richard Edwards was the son of Agnes Blewett, a poor woman who may have had a brief affair with King Henry VII. Richard had a mysterious benefactor who paid for him to study at Corpus Christi College, Oxford University. This was far above the attainments of any of his siblings. Richard took after his possible father. In his love of music, he was made a gentleman of the Royal Chapel, another appointment well above his station, and he became master of singing boys. He married Helen Griffin. Richard wrote and produced several comic plays, poems, and songs. His comedy, Paloman and Arcite, based on Chaucer's The Knight's Tale, was performed before his possible half-sister, Queen Elizabeth. The first performance on the stage fell, killing 3 people and injuring 5. But the show went on anyway. Richard Edwards died at the age of 41, Audrey Malt. The king was interested with Joan Dingley, a palace laundress, and Ethel Rita Malt was her daughter. After Joan wed a royal tailor, they raised Ethel Rita, sometimes known as Audrey, together. On his deathbed, Henry handed the former laundress and tailor an auspicious wedding gift of money and land he had taken during the monastery's disillusionment. King Henry left Audrey a substantial bequest of £1312. During Queen Mary's reign, Audrey, his base-born daughter, married poet and writer John Harrington and had a daughter named Hester. Audrey Malt went with Princess Elizabeth to the Tower of London, where she was imprisoned for almost a year, along with 6 other women. Elizabeth gave her likely half-sister a prize for her loyalty when Mary passed away and Elizabeth took over as queen. Audrey was there when Elizabeth was crowned in 1559, but she passed away later that month from an unspecified illness at the age of 32. King Henry VII was said to have fathered John Perrot, another illustrious Elizabethan lord. Though John did share the king's demeanor and physical attributes, his grandson-in-law, who is eager to capitalize on this royal relationship for his own gain, was the main source of the allegations regarding his paternity. Historians have since discounted the rumors. John was the 3rd child of his mother Mary Berkeley, and King Henry's policy was to pursue young, typically single ladies. Furthermore, Mary was not known to have been present when her son Henry VIII conceived the 2 youngest known children of his marriage, Elizabeth, his daughter by Anne Boleyn, and Edward, his long-awaited legitimate son, born by his 3rd wife Jane Seymour. Henry had 3 other wives, but none of them produced any children. The only son to inherit the kingdom after Henry VIII's death was 9-year-old Edward VI, but his 3 surviving legal children each had a chance to take the throne. After a brief reign, William succumbed to TB at the age of 15, ending a 9-day period in which his cousin Lady Jane Grey attempted to usurp the throne. Mary I, who was 37 years old, was crowned queen. She slaughtered more than 300 religious martyrs out of desperation to return the nation to Catholicism, garnering her the moniker Bloody Mary. In addition, she was frantic to conceive a child with her husband, King Philip II of Spain, in order to retain the kingdom from her sister Elizabeth, a Protestant. However, she lost her life to uterine cancer at the age of 42 following 2 miscarriages. Elizabeth finally attained the throne at age 25. For 45 years, under her great leadership, England had prosperity, thriving trade, art, and colonies. With her red hair, sharp mind, and ruthlessness, she had some resemblance to her father, Henry VIII, but she also diverged from him in one area. In actuality, she was never married and had no kids. Henry VIII's bloodline officially ended with Elizabeth, as none of his 3 famous children produced any grandchildren for him. James VI of Scotland, who was Henry's sister Margaret's grandson, inherited the throne after Elizabeth's death. Nevertheless, Henry VIII's lineage continued through 3 of his 7 illegitimate children, many of whom went on to become well-known nobles with numerous children of their own.